Maze Runner: The Death Cure is the third and final installment of the Maze Runner series. It is not, however, split up into two parts like Harry Potter, Hunger Games, and Twilight did, and Divergent attempted to do. And this movie takes place a couple months after the events of the second one. Teresa has betrayed the group of friends led by Dylan O'Brien's character of Thomas. The evil company Wicked attacked the Right Arm's base and they took Minho with them, one of the friends with Thomas, and now they have to go try to infiltrate Wicked to get Minho back, try to get revenge, and also, maybe, just possibly, find the cure to the flare virus that is turning people into these zombie creatures called the Cranks. This movie series has been with my channel for quite some time now. In 2014, I reviewed the first film, and I still stand by that. I really did enjoy that first film. I thought it was a very intriguing plot. The second film, however, did leave me just a little bit disappointed, though. Not that I hated it or anything. I still thought it was a decent film, but just that it just felt a little more draggy and a little bit just lackluster compared to the first film. And this film was originally supposed to come out January of last year, but because of Dylan O'Brien's injury, in case you didn't know, they had to push this film back a little bit to now. And I was a little worried about that, mainly because the young adult adapted movie series have kind of just died out a little bit. Divergent had to cancel their second installment to their finale. The Fifth Wave didn't really go anywhere. And with the Maze Runner series not really making the kind of money that Hunger Games or Harry Potter or Twilight did, this movie's kind of coming out right at the time where we've kind of just let that young adult phase just kind of pass on. And I was worried that maybe the length of time since I've seen the last Maze Runner films, which literally is 2015, maybe could have affected my overall enjoyment of it. But overall, I would say I was quite surprised walking out of this film. I'd say it's definitely better than The Scourge Trials, and it's almost on par with the first film. I had a blast with this film. Surprisingly so. I do want to get the negatives out of the way first, though, because as I mentioned earlier, this is a part of the young adult genre. There are similar tropes that other young adult novels turned to movies have had before, and it's kind of hard to just ignore that, especially since it's been so common lately. So there is that sense of familiarity with the overall story of this film, which is definitely the weakest element of the movie, and I can understand where some would be coming from if they were to say that they felt that this film was tiresome, just kind of old at this point. And though I will agree there are some unoriginal tropes in this film as far as its story, I think the execution was actually quite good. The film's action sequences take up the majority of the film, and Wes Ball's direction, very good. This director, he's been with the Maze Runner trilogy since day one, and I'm glad that he did because each Maze Runner film feels like kind of an improvement on the last as far as its action sequences. This film has a little bit of a bigger budget than the other two, and it's also got much more impressive directing, and I thought the other two Maze Runner films had impressive directing. And there is a nice way they kind of diversify the action sequences, because at one moment you'll have a chase scene, but then you'll have some gunplay, and then you'll also have some close quarters fist fighting stuff. It's all very well handled at the end of the day, and it's a really good way to kind of expand what they have instead of doing the same old kind of action and that having be repetitive. And even the visual effects have kind of improved in this film. In the other two movies, they kind of looked a little hokey, but in this one, the visual effects I think looked a lot better. This guy, I want to see make another action film with maybe a better story, because I think he could actually make something really fantastic, because the direction in this film, it opens up with this train sequence. They're driving cars to try to get on it. I thought that was really enjoyable, and then from then on, there's other sequences that I thought were also really fun, and it just builds and builds and builds, and a lot of the suspense really kicks in the middle of the second act, and it just kind of builds from there too. The action-wise, this movie is a lot of fun. You can watch this film, and from an action filmmaking perspective, it is really impressive, and especially when you have a main star like Dylan O'Brien dedicated to doing his own stunts. That's why he got his injury after all, because he was doing his own stunt work, and that is very commendable to see Dylan O'Brien actually dedicate himself to a franchise like this, that at first glance might just be like, oh, another one of these. He actually dedicates himself to the role of Thomas, and it overall makes for the better film experience, because you're not watching a lead actor who just feels like he's phoning it in, like, oh, this is going to be my kickoff, I'll just do other stuff that I care about later. This feels like he actually really cares about the character of Thomas. It feels like when he's portraying Thomas, there's real emotion to it. And I think Dylan O'Brien could be one of the next big things as far as actors go. Because ever since the first Maze Runner film, I knew he was super talented, and as each Maze Runner film progresses, he's gotten better and better in my opinion. Especially seeing where the character has changed since the first film. Very confused, didn't know where he was, and now he's one of the leading figures of this rebellion against the company of Wicked. And watching this film made me really appreciate seeing Thomas grow in the other two Maze Runner films. It reminded me why I liked him since the beginning. And he also has really good chemistry with his friend Newt, played by Thomas Brody Sangster, who is also very good in this film. This is his best Maze Runner performance. He uses common sense, but he's also funny. He also has really good chemistry with Dylan O'Brien. Their friendship is honestly one of the greatest aspects that this film has, because it does feel like a genuine friendship. It doesn't feel like two actors that were forced to be there because the money was pretty big. It felt like a true friendship, and I think that part is a really good emotional anchor for this film. And Kaya Scodelario, I was a little worried because she is now playing a character who is the backstabby one. You know, if you've seen The Scorched Trials, which, spoilers, it's kind of hard to avoid when talking about this film, she's joined Wicked, not because she's evil necessarily, but because she wants to find a cure, and the way they kind of treated that character in this movie, I did appreciate it. It didn't come across as forced or just too contrived. They wrote the character in a way where it worked for the film, and it also works for the character herself. And I will say though, to mention Wicked real quick, despite the goofy name, there was an aspect of them where I was thinking like, okay, they're not that evil. They just want to know how to solve this flare virus problem. Like Ava Page, her character in the other two films, they portrayed her as a little bit more villainous, but in this one, there is that true sense of sincerity to her. Like there's an actual human being in there. And that's something that took me by surprise, because after seeing the first two Maze Runner movies, I was just thinking like, oh yeah, you're the over-the-top bad guy, right? But she's actually like a genuine like person who just wants to help people. However, they kinda have this paired up with the character of Jansen, played by the guy who plays Littlefinger in Game of Thrones. I don't watch Game of Thrones, but from what I know, he's kinda playing the same exact character, where he doesn't really care about anyone else. He just kinda cares about what's best for him, and in that way, his character really didn't work for me all that much, mainly because the conflicting ideologies of Jansen and Ava Page aren't really delved into all that much, so when certain things go down later in the film, it doesn't really feel all that great, and it doesn't really feel all that threatening. It's just kind of like, whatever. And speaking of wasted potential, Walton Goggins is in this movie for like a minute, and then he's just gone, and I was like, oh, well, he's like a really good actor, but I guess he was in this movie for a minute. I would have loved to see more of him, but while I was watching the movie, I didn't really have time to focus on some of these negatives at first, because this movie, though it is 2 hours and 20 minutes, and though I will agree, it is a little long for a film of this type, it is very exciting. Throughout the duration of the film, it is built on its action sequences. There are moments where they do have to sit down and go over a game plan, but for the most part, it is going by action sequences and ratcheting up tension, and I think that really worked for this film. There are a couple of moments where physics don't really apply, but in the context of the film and the way they kind of portrayed it, I could buy it just a little bit. It's not like they just did it and expected you to believe it. They were just kind of like, this is insane, right? You know? So in that sense, I could accept it for the goofy kind of action that it was. But the action I did think was legitimately great. And what made me really entertained by this film was the overall direction by Wes Ball, which is why I'm glad that he stuck around for all three films. Because if he didn't, who knows where the Maze Runner films would be now, you know? This movie could have turned out like completely sloppy and messy and shaky cam galore, but the action scenes were very well handled, very well shot too. Like the cinematography is very good for this film. Like there's a lot of surprises about this film as far as not just quality, but there are certain small story things, not like big like plot twists or anything, just like small reveals that I was like, oh my, they're actually doing that? Okay, like it was actually able to surprise me too. So overall, does this movie have its problems? Of course, it is another young adult film at the end of the day, and it does share similar tropes that are just kind of old at this point. I think the villainous aspect is a little wasted, and this movie doesn't really feel like it has a strong sense of finality. It does have an ending that I think pretty much works for the most part, but there are just a couple things that I was thinking like, but what about this? It feels like maybe you're leading into a sequel with that, but this is the last one, so not very that strong in that sense. But because of the action sequences and the way they were handled, I was having a blast with this film. A lot of people kind of complained that the movie was kind of dragging on, but I think it was actually going by pretty well. Better than the Scorch Trials, I think. The acting is all very good. It was great seeing these characters back together, because watching them, I was instantly reminded, like, oh yeah, that's why I like the other two movies, because these friends all have a really good bond with each other, and it was really enjoyable to see them again. And there are also other surprises that caught me off guard that actually made me like the movie a little bit more. There's nice little moments that kind of will tug at your heartstrings a little bit, and that bit surprised me too, because I was really expecting to get no emotion out of this film, but there are actually some moments where I was thinking like, oh man, that's really sweet. I'm gonna give Maze Runner: The Death Cure a B. It is honestly one of my most surprising of the year already, mainly because after the Scorch Trials I wasn't really knowing where the film was going to go, but it actually turned out to be a really fun action film with a lot of great suspenseful moments, a lot of good humor too, especially from the characters, and the characters themselves were entertaining to watch. It does have its share of problems, but at the end of the day there is a lot of entertainment to be had that made me really enjoy this film. I think the first one is still the best, but it's better than the second one, and that's all I really asked for. But if you've seen Maze Runner: The Death Cure, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.